Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for making time this afternoon. My name is Suhanya Rafael. I'm the museum director here at M+. And we thought in the hurly-burly of this Art Week and the Art Basel fair about to open tomorrow that we needed to add an important dimension to the discussion around museum making, collecting, and what does it mean in this time today to preserve the present and think about what sustainable practices could be. So Veronica Castillo, the M+ Director of Collection and Exhibitions, put together a thought bubble with her team, Sarah Moy, and brought together a really eminent group of colleagues to share thoughts, provide provocative questions, I'm sure, maybe even some solutions, or maybe not, regarding this question. So we're very happy to welcome you here today and to say that the work of preservation, of conservation, is critical and intrinsic to our museums. And the work that our colleagues do are very much in thinking, I believe, in terms of what a contemporary museum needs to be. And the principles around our sustainable practice, what is the footprint of the work that we do look like? How do we minimize carbon in this context where, you know, we had a CMAM conference actually in Los Angeles just in December where the whole topic was around sustainability, and then 2 weeks later the city was burning, and it felt like a premonition on one hand, devastating, but something that we should, as a community of arts-related workers and interested public, we need to address. So I know that this afternoon's conversations will be rich, and you will enjoy this afternoon, and we feel as a museum we must bring these different facets of information, of research and scholarship to you all. So enjoy the afternoon, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Suhanya. Welcome, everyone. It's a real pleasure to welcome you here. My name is Veronica Castillo, and I'm the Director for Collection Exhibitions here at M+. As Suhanya has mentioned, we had been discussing about what sustainability means for us for a long time, and we really wanted to do something about it that can have an impact, even if it's a small impact. It's very important to collaborate. Museums are extremely collaborative in themselves, so we talk to each other a lot, and we thought it would be really, really important to bring some key leaders in the thinking about sustainability from museums around the world here to talk to all of us as museum colleagues, but also to our own public and our members and patrons. So welcome all of you. We really are hoping that sharing our expertise on what we know about sustainability and museums. Museums can be sometimes not that sustainable if you think about the way we collect and what it means. But at the same time, we are considered very trusted organizations, so we have the power to influence our public and raise awareness. And I think that's something that we are trying to do here, a small scale first, and it will keep growing, so watch the space. So just to let you know a bit the session, I'm just not going to talk too much now. The session is going to consist of 2 parts that are linked by the common topic of preserving collections in a sustainable manner. We'll start with presenting some more focused stories and some very practical conservation case studies. Some of them are very interesting. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. And then we'll elevate our views towards a more comprehensive look at the key role that collections care can play in defining the overall sustainability efforts of the museum. So the first panel will touch on complexities on preserving contemporary collections for the future generations, but also how the conservation field as a profession is evolving to adapt to all these new challenges. And the panelists will be in conversation with M+ Senior Conservator Sarah Moy. The second panel will focus on sustainable practices within the museum sector, so we'll get a bit of a bird view. I'll have the honor to converse with three eminent colleagues who will present us with a wide overview of actions that institutions are taking to progress on this critical area of work. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Sarah Moy to the stage to kickstart the first panel. Sarah, please.
Thank you, Sonia and Veronica. Good afternoon, and welcome to our panel discussion, Contemporary Art Conservation Beyond Materiality. My name is Sarah Moy, and I am a conservator at M+. It is my privilege to introduce this session, bringing together distinguished experts, Dr. Nancy Liu from the Liam Museum of Art, Kate Lewis from the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and Dr. Pip Lawrenson from the University of College London to explore how conservation has evolved beyond preserving physical materials alone. Traditionally, conservation focused primarily on stabilizing objects through material-based treatments. Although foundational, this approach sometimes prioritized physical preservation at the expense of an artwork's intangible qualities and original context. Today, contemporary art conservation demands a more interdisciplinary approach. Conservators now preserve not only physical materials like paint layers or paint fibers, but also conceptual intent, social context, audience interaction, and the intangible digital or ephemeral elements that give contemporary artworks significance. This shift is especially apparent with the rise of time-based media. Artworks that rely on technology and duration as an essential dimension. Technological obsolescence, evolving artist intentions, and participatory elements require conservators to broaden their methods, carefully integrating ethics, collaboration, and research to inform preservation decisions. Hong Kong offers a compelling example of this transformation. From the 1960s through the 1980s, local conservation efforts under British administration were largely reactive, emphasizing emergency repairs rather than systematic preservation. The 1971 Antiquities and Monuments Ordinance created a framework for safeguarding cultural significant sites and objects, and the Antiquities and Monuments Office was established in 1976 to manage these resources. Professional practice advanced significantly around Hong Kong's 1997 handover, highlighting the need for proactive preservation. Museums expanded their conservation capacities, and individuals began pursuing international training to become conservators. The establishment of M+ in 2012 and its opening in 2021 further emphasized interdisciplinary collaboration among conservators, curators, scientists, artists, and digital specialists. This collaboration has been essential in addressing the complex challenges of contemporary art, particularly in managing non-traditional and ephemeral materials such as plastics, organic matter, digital media, kinetic and immersive installations, interactive artworks, and performance in site-specific pieces. Hong Kong's dynamic art scene, amplified by Art Basel Hong Kong since 2013, continues to increase demand for specialized conservation expertise. Today's panel will consider several key questions. How do we ethically approach conceptual artworks that challenge traditional notions of authenticity? How do we confront technological obsolescence in time-based media? And how can conservation practice become more sustainable, inclusive, and culturally diverse? Contemporary art conservation beyond materiality invites us to reconsider conservation, not simply as preserving physical artworks, but as actively engaging with evolving artistic practices and global issues such as sustainability and equity. It challenges us to develop preservation methods resonating deeply with future generations. Thank you for joining this conversation. Without further ado, let me introduce our first panelist. Dr. Nancy Liu is the head of conservation of the Liam Museum of Art in Seoul, specializing in modern contemporary art. She holds a doctorate in oil painting conservation from Tokyo University of the Arts and has been active in the conservation field for over 20 years. Since joining the Samsung Cultural Foundation in 2002, Dr. Liu has significantly advanced conservation practices at both the Liam and Hoam museums. Her research focuses on modern contemporary oil paintings and contemporary installation art, addressing the challenges of evolving artistic materials and techniques. She is deeply committed to fostering innovation and collaboration with the contemporary art conservation in Korea. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nancy Liu. I'm from Liu Museum of Art, Seoul, Korea. I'm very honored today to be here with all of you for this public event. As the range of materials in art expands from traditional to unconventional, conservation approaches and methods are also evolving in response. I believe this event today was organized within that very context to reflect on these changes. In my presentation today, I will first introduce the current state of the conservation field in Korea. Then I'll share a few recent case studies involving conservation of unconventional materials. I hope this session offers a meaningful opportunity for all of you to broaden our perspectives and enjoy learning from each other's experiences. Okay, a quick look at Korea's conservation history, which has grown rapidly in recent decades. The three main museums leading to conservation fields are the National Museum of Korea and the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art and Liu Museum of Art, where I belong. As you can see from the timeline, conservation of cultural heritage began in the 1980s at the National Museum of Korea. The conservation field initially started with cultural heritage and then gradually expanded to include modern art. One quick point here is the introduction of graduate program in conservation in the early 2000s, which laid the foundation for the development of conservation studies. Also, expansion of Lium's conservation department in 2004 and the opening of MMCA Seoul in 2013 marked key turning points, gradually extending its scope to contemporary art. So this progression led to the establishment of dedicated team for time-based media conservation in 2018 at MMCA. Although steady progress has been made, there is still a long way to go. Based on the survey responses from Korean conservators that last month, the main challenges we face are as follows. There is no specialized graduate program in contemporary art conservation, and job opportunities are limited. And many mistakenly believe that artists can always resolve conservation issues. Their input is valuable, but not always sufficient. Finally, due to a lack of clear guidelines for unconventional materials, communication is essential, yet its importance is still often overlooked. So the three case studies I'll share today highlight the importance of conservators in conserving unconventional materials and why their role is essential. The first case study is about a sculpture by Anika E., featured in the solo exhibition last year at Lyon. Amputation consists of metal and foam structure covered entirely with tempura, fried flowers, coated in resin, giving it its unique form. This is from the Biofold sculpture series that explores transformation, decay, and preservation through organic materials. So this is a close-up photo where you can see the different colors and shapes of the flowers. Anikai's flower tempura series initially started with works on panels. This photo is from 2014. You can see the green color of the flower stem. But let's look at how it changed after 11 years. The colors are completely obscured by the yellow tempera coating. When asked about this issue, the artist stated that it is acceptable. The color will naturally change over time, and this transformation should be accepted. So during the installation of the exhibition, some of the flowers around the joints of the structure were damaged. So fresh flowers were deep fried and replaced according to the artist's manual. Here are 23 flowers species that are specified for frying. As the exhibition approached the end, our chief curator expressed strong interest in acquiring this piece. So conservators were called into the pre-acquisition meeting to address potential conservation issues. We needed to acknowledge and accept that the artwork's original appearance at the time of creation would gradually change over time. So how can we extend the lifespan, and how should we preserve it? The biggest challenge was that even the artist could not predict how these materials would change over decades. So currently, the best way to respect the artist's intent is to accept the artwork's color changes and do our best to maintain it in a displayable state. The artist provided detailed instructions on how to deep fry tempura in case replacement becomes necessary. But replacing the flowers involves complex decision-making and is not an easy task, raising questions about how often it can actually be carried out and what impact this might have on the integrity of the artwork. Understanding the materials and techniques used is important, but it's equally critical to discuss with the artist what the acceptable boundaries are for displaying the artwork. So the acquisition process of this work is still ongoing, and once it becomes part of the collection, all related information should be carefully documented and preserved for the future. The second conservation case involves a sculpture by Korean contemporary artist Kim Bum. This piece is part of the Patient series and depicts a patient sitting confined behind bars surrounded by flames. The heating wire was disconnected, so the light did not turn on. This is the heated wire section that lights up. It is shaped like a human figure and made from a single continuous wire. So when heated, it glows a deep red as seen in the right image. Also, you can see that the figure is holding a flower in its right hand. So every component was handcrafted by the artist, with no commercially produced elements included, except for the rotating dial. So when we consulted the artist about the repair, he insisted on carrying out all the repairs personally in his studio. But for conservators, this was not a simple matter. We had to carefully consider how his intervention might affect the artwork's long-term integrity. That's why we ultimately decided to step in and be involved in the treatment process. So in this case, the biggest challenge was that all parts of the work were crafted by the artist, so we had to rely entirely on him for repairs. While it is common practice for artists to be involved, in this case, it wasn't easy to entrust the entire repair process to the artist, especially because he was focused on restoring the work to a perfect state. So ultimately, the repair was carried out by the artist. However, a series of meetings and interviews allowed for in-depth discussion at each stage of the process. Through close communication with us, the artist provided a detailed repair manual so that in the future, repairs could be handled by others. This outcome reflects the mutual understanding built through the interviews. So during the interview at the artist studio, he provided us with these extra wires that were used for the repair. If conservators had not been involved, the artist would have taken the work to his studio, repaired it according to his intent, and perhaps it would have been returned without record of exactly what had changed. The third case study is a time-based media artwork, area that has long been a challenge for us due to the lack of dedicated conservator. As a result, installations and repairs were handled on case-by-case basis, often without documentation, making long-term conservation difficult. Last year, we partnered with University College London's conservation program for a student placement. Through this graduate student Leah Balagapo conducted an in-depth study on Unix sign number 1 by Jenny Holzer. Acquired in 1994, Unix sign number 1 was exhibited in 1997 and 2011. An electromechanical arm moves horizontally to display rotating 55 images. The signboard consists of dots covered in red, blue, and green transparent plastic. Behind each dot, a magnetic disc opens or closes to control light from fluorescent tubes. However, while the arm still moves, the dot control mechanism has failed, freezing the screen. And these are the 55 rotating images. We also discovered that the program, originally stored on a cassette tape, had been transferred to a floppy disk and later embedded onto a laptop. Although the laptop turns on, it fails to send data to the sign. So further investigation is needed to identify whether it's a software or hardware issue. Oops. Our biggest challenge was lack of knowledge and lack of institutional awareness in time-based media conservation. To explore conservation options, we consulted local technicians, the artist studio, and institutions with similar works. And we discovered that Whitney Museum of American Art had refabricated their non-functional Unix sign number 1 in 2012 with artists' approval. So this is the LED version that was refabricated in 2012. Upon hearing that Lium's signboard was still operational, Jenny Holzer expressed a preference for repair over refabrication. So this shows a shift in her perspective, While she previously favored refabrication to preserve the message, she now acknowledges the historical significance of the original technology. After Leah's placement, internal discussions lean toward repair over refabrication. As conservators, we still have many unanswered questions, but our immediate priority is to diagnose the exact failure and attempt repairs to preserve the artwork's integrity. We must also consider the possibility of future refabrication, carefully preserving both the artist's intent and the work's authenticity as means of extending its lifespan. The student placement with UCL served as a valuable opportunity to highlight the need for time-based media conservation and the importance of collaboration with experts beyond conservators. This project is a highly intriguing case and will continue to be the subject of further discussion and research. To conclude, in contemporary art conservation, while the artist's input play a significant role, we have also confirmed the importance of conservators' involvement. Through the case studies, we compared the perspective of the artists. Anika E. showed flexibility regarding material transformation. Kim Baum placed extreme importance on the authenticity of the artwork, and Jenny Holzer navigated between realizing artistic intent and preserving originality. I hope these case studies provide insights and give you a chance to rethink the role of conservators in contemporary art conservation. So I will conclude my talk with a photo of our conservation team and my fellow Korean conservators, the Inca members. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Our next speaker is Kate Lewis. Kate Lewis is the Agnes Gunn Chief Conservator and Media Conservator at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. She previously served as a time-based media conservator at Tate in London and has collaborated closely with contemporary artists such as Burrell Coral, David Lamelas, Tony Arsler, and Liz Rhodes. She holds an MA in Conservation from the University of Northumbria and a BA in Art History from the Courtauld Institute of Art. Committed to expanding conservation education and professional pathways, Kate leads a Mellon Foundation funded initiative at MoMA and serves as an adjunct instructor at New York University's Institute of Fine Arts. She is also on the board of Voices in Contemporary Art, co-establishing their time-based media stewardship workshop series. Kate?
I'd like to start by thanking the M+ team, Veronica and Sarah, for their very kind invitation, and to Sandy for getting me here and making all of the arrangements. It's a great pleasure to be part of this panel, and together with my fellow panel members, Nancy and Pip. So I'm going to start with a really brief introduction to MoMA and an overview of contemporary art conservation in the US, followed by 4 case studies. This is Rainforest 5, a 1973 sound work by David Tudor and composers Inside Electronics. Each object suspended in the space emits its own unique sound. And here it is being activated. Contemporary artworks don't just sit still. They come alive through sound, performance, and display. A little bit about the Museum of Modern Art. It was founded by 3 women, Lily Bliss, Mary Sullivan, and Abby Rockefeller in 1929, based on their shared desire to create a museum that supports living artists and modern art. And this remains the museum's mission nearly 100 years later. And the first conservator on staff was Jean Volkmer, who started in 1958. The museum's mission is to connect people from around the world to the art of our time, to be a catalyst for experimentation, learning, and creativity, and a gathering place for all, and a home for artists and their ideas. And really that last phrase, a home for artists and their ideas, is central to conservation's work. This is David Lamellis here on the left in the hat, performing his work Time at MoMA in 2015. Okay. Oh, here we go. Sorry. This is the museum today. So starting in 1929, the museum began with a collection of 8 prints and 1 drawing, and now it has over 200,000 works spanning 6 curatorial departments that include painting and sculpture, drawings and prints, film, photography, and media and performance, and architecture and design. So here you can see the museum's visitors enjoying this kind of like dazzling, immersive installation by Hegu Yang titled Handles, a work that blends esoteric spiritual philosophies with contemporary political events. Okay, so how did contemporary art conservation develop in the US? Well, it really began to take shape in the early 1990s, intertwined with developments in Europe. So this timeline here, this is like the green line down the middle, begins on the left in sort of around 1995. And this gives an overview of the significant number of initiatives over the past 30 years, which include workshops, conferences, publications, grant-funded research, and professional groups. This is not an exhaustive list, but I hope it illustrates to you the decades of work and engagement it has taken to develop the field of contemporary art conservation as a distinct practice. Central to this evolution, oh, here we go, sorry, I'm having trouble with the clicker. Here we go, all right. Yes, so really at the center of this, I think, is collaborative conservation, engaging with artists in their studios, fabricators, artists' estates, technical experts, IT, exhibition designers, registrars, curators, all the different stakeholders that come together and intersect with the making and caring of contemporary art. So, deodorized central mass with satellites by Mike Kelly features this sort of very large room-size installation with children's stuffed animals, wall-mounted fiberglass sculptures around the room, and disinfectant. This work is immediately engaging because you're seeing these kind of like stuffed animals floating in the sky. And then as you look more closely, you begin to notice that they appear a little bit grubby. The artist consciously purchased them as discarded items from secondhand shops. But as you stand there a bit longer, you begin to notice a disinfectant-like smell filling the gallery and unlocking new questions about this work. So Mike Kelly provided a recipe for a liquid mix placed in plastic tanks hidden inside these wall-mounted sculptures, which are known as deodorizers. And the tanks are inside, and then at the bottom of these tanks, on that sort of flat surface, there's a nozzle that then sprays the smell out into the room. So this work was planned to be on display for 2 years. So in preparing for exhibition, we had notes from a previous installation explaining that there'd been a lot of nozzle blockage of where the liquid, the smell, was coming out, that had been a reoccurring challenge. And we also sort of noticed that there were stains on the sculpture caused by these drips. Also, the tanks spray out the liquid at unannounced intervals. So there was concern that children walking past at that level might get sort of disinfectant blowing into their eyes, and it might be going on people's clothes. So with all of this going on, in an effort to support the smooth running of an installation over multiple years, my colleagues, Tina Abed, decided to research different options for the delivery of the smell. So we work with a company based in Germany called Scent Communications, and I'm going to play a little video.
This was originally conceived to spray an odor that is a little jarring and supposed to smell like urinal cake.
My role very often is to translate between an artist and a perfumer, because the perfumer always has a very clear way to design a fragrance for a body typically, but an artist of course thinks differently. Mike Kelly probably didn't think about creating a nice beautiful environment, but wanted to kind of disturb this strange mixture of ingredients is something difficult to describe and only an artist can come up with. Well, for me, there's no good and no bad scent. It's all related to your personal memory, to your experiences, to your cultural context. And if you learned it's a bad smell, it's a bad smell, but other people find it beautiful.
Okay, this is my colleague Tina, who you heard at the beginning here on the left. And installation, there was a rogue soft toy. One of the things about the soft toy is they're all facing inwards, so you don't see their faces. So she was just repositioning this one. And then on the right here, you can see these scent emitters that were shown in the video clip that were developed for this iteration. There are 8 of them dispersed across the gallery, and the smell is activated by small fans inside these like grey little round things here at the bottom. And the fans blow across this thick paste which contains this urinal cake smell. And that's what blows and sort of sublimates into the gallery. Smell is very personal. We all experience it differently. It's very hard to measure and document. So it's been a really interesting project to work on. And if any of you are in New York over the next 12 months, please come along and let us know what you think and whether we've managed. There's a round circle around the scent emitters in the gallery. Okay. Skittles by Josh Klein was first shown outdoors on the High Line Walkway in New York City, and it includes an industrial refrigerator containing smoothies made from unconventional combinations of ingredients, such as kale chips, squid ink, sneakers, foam bills, and pepper spray. Each smoothie stands as a portrait of a different contemporary lifestyle from 2014. When grouped together, they evoke a landscape of aspiration and taste, and at times deprivation in a metropolis like New York City. So this work was acquired shortly after by MoMA and installed 5 years later here in our galleries. The refrigerator and the bottles, that's what you get. But each time you install the work, you need to make the smoothies because we all want fresh smoothies. So to prepare for the exhibition, Josh Klein worked with us in the conservation studio, and here he is showing us how to make his smoothies. His recipe book provided at acquisition guides the process, but as with any recipe, there's a level of tacit knowledge that's involved. I am not a gifted baker, so I need a baking recipe that doesn't assume any knowledge of baking skills. So for me, this work really underscores the theme of continuity. We made the smoothies with Josh, and we produced a lot more contextual and reflexive documentation to supplement the artist's recipe. But there is a certain amount of embodied knowledge gained through the experience, and that is hard to capture, no matter how much we as conservators write and photograph. Sorry. The work is really very much about New York City in 2014. This is already a decade old. So again, each time we install this work, we're going to need to engage with the artist because there are transient elements in the smoothies, such as phone cards. And I don't know about you, but I actually haven't seen a phone card for a while now. So I think we've all moved to Sims. Long March Restart by Feng Mengbo is a work in MoMA's collection, and also I understand is also here in M+'s collection. So the artist created a video game for a single player. You play using a wireless Xbox gaming handset, which you walk through in this immersive environment. You start on the left, and then you come down here on the right. And it's accompanied by sound effects reminiscent of 1990s video games. The player's avatar is a Red Army soldier who progresses through 14 different landscapes that include ice, rain, fire, and he fires Coca-Cola cans along his way at ghosts and demons. This image is a very traditional conservation image, a photograph capturing all the physical elements of the artwork, showing the hardware needed to realize this artwork in the gallery. But at the heart of this game is a video game. And Feng Mengbo worked together with a programmer, and they used a program called Multimedia Fusion. And then once the game was complete, it was exported as an executable file that runs on Windows XP SBS with a connected sound file. This could be considered a self-contained software-based work. The executable and sound files are stored in the museum's digital art storage, and it does not rely on external dependencies apart from the operating program. For this work, we were able to build a custom replica computer. So on the far left, you see the artist's original computer. And then like gamers, we built our own computer to match it exactly. And then we also worked with our colleagues in IT, and we created what we called a backup. So that one in the middle, the backup copy, that was actually an old MoMA staff's PC desktop computer that was just on a shelf in IT. So we worked with IT, and we also made that as a backup. But this is a game that you can also run in a virtual machine, and that's basically a piece of software that mimics operating systems and PC hardware. So along with the equipment, right now, we have everything we need in-house to show this work at MoMA. But at the other end of the spectrum is something like unsupervised machine hallucinations, MoMA, by the artist Rafiq Anadol. Unsupervised ponders what a machine might dream about after seeing more than 200 years of art in MoMA's collection. Anadol uses artificial intelligence to interpret and transform the museum's collection dataset, which is publicly available on GitHub, which is a web-based tool for software development, very specifically open source development. So the viewer, when you're sitting there, it's this continuously kind of shifting image that you see on the screen. And at moments, it looks familiar, and then it disappears. So this work went on display at MoMA for a year in the lobby in 2022. This immense screen, I think you have a bigger one here at M+. This immense screen was installed by a specialist vendor, and Anadol's studio came and installed all the computers and everything that it took to run this kind of machine learning software, together with support from our in-house IT and AV team. Anadol also incorporated site-specific data, feeding into the software and impacting the visualization of the machine's dreams. So there's a camera capturing light and movement. There's a speaker capturing the acoustics of the space. And then the machine learning software was also connected to an external source that collected local weather data. So all of this information then came in and like coalesced within this machine learning environment to impact the shifting imagery that you were seeing generated live on the screen. So the conservation approach to this work is very different to the Mengbo. Throughout the run of the exhibition, the artist studio maintained remote access, ensuring the correct running of everything, making updates and adjustments. So with the complexity of this software, hardware, and site-specific real-time data, the artwork will require close collaboration with Rafiq and his studio to support this work now and into the future. And as stewards, central to the care of these complex artworks is embracing and supporting the networks of artists, experts, and communities beyond the museum walls. I'd just like to end with this slide of the conservation team at MoMA. So as one of my colleagues once said, each artwork is a unique gift, and it takes a diverse group of people to care for these gifts. So I'd like to end by acknowledging my conservation colleagues at MoMA who are committed to conserving this endlessly fascinating collection. But also part of this commitment is to provide opportunities for the next generation. So within this group, we have 5 fellows and an intern, because caring for these works definitely requires an ongoing team effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate. Our next speaker is Dr. Pip Lawrenson, who is Professor of Conservation at the University College London and Director of the MSc in the Conservation of Contemporary Art and Media Art at UCL East. With 30 years of experience in contemporary art conservation, she began her career as a sculpture conservator at the Tate, where she established and led the time-based media conservation section from 1996 to 2010. From 2010 to 2022, she served as head of collection care research at Tate, securing support and leading the Mellon Foundation funded project Reshaping the Collectible, When Artworks Live in the Museum, between 2008 and 2022. Committed to interdisciplinary research and practice, her work addresses the evolving challenges of conserving contemporary collections in the 21st century. Dr. Lawrenson received her doctorate from UCL. She is an accredited member of the Institute of Conservation, co-chair of ICON Contemporary, a member of the steering committee for the International Network for the Conservation of Contemporary Art, and a fellow of the International Institute for Conservation. Welcome, Pip.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and I'd like to repeat thanks to Veronica and Sarah for inviting me to join you today, and thank my colleagues who are on this panel. As Sarah said, my name is Pip Lawrenson, and I lead the team at UCL that's training a new generation of conservators to respond to art of our time within the context of our time. So bold words, but what does this ambition mean today? So contemporary art conservation, I would argue, is the most rapidly evolving area of conservation, not necessarily for its technical achievements, although there are many, but for the way in which it's pushing our understanding of conservation and why it matters. So being part of this rapidly developing field is what I'm passionate about, but why should you, as an audience, care about the conservation of contemporary art? So contemporary art conservation has developed rapidly in response to changing artistic practice, expanding our understanding of conservation to consider a different set of vulnerabilities and fragilities. So spurred on by time-based media, artworks and performance works coming into collections, contemporary art conservation was encouraged increasingly to look beyond the purely material focus and consider different strategies to ensure these works could continue to be displayed. So memory studies, oral history, computer science, new materialism, and an understanding of the authentic and the conservation of things beyond the material became as relevant a training ground as chemistry or material studies. It was the acquisition of this work by Bruce Naumann's, it's called Violent Incident from 1993, while I was a young sculpture conservator at Tate, that set me on the road to developing time-based media conservation. And I've been asked to say a little bit about this history. So this was the 90s, a time that saw an explosion onto the scene of a group of artists who came to be known as YBAs, Young British Artists, a moment not too dissimilar perhaps from the arrival of young Chinese artists onto the international scene in the early 2000s. YBA artists like Steve McQueen and Sarah Lucas, Gillian Waring, Jane and Louise Wilson, and of course Tracy Emin. These works began to enter the collection, as did works by US and Canadian artists, so very large, technically complex installations by artists like Bill Viola, Gary Hill, and Stan Douglas. So these works had increasingly high price tags, and the trustees began to ask questions about the readiness of the team at Tate to take care of these works. At this time, there was a real question as to whether time-based media artwork should come under the care of conservation at all, or whether these works should be looked after by perhaps the AV team. So pressure from the trustees, plus a really strong belief in providing artworks with the same level of care, whatever their form or medium, alongside a willingness to take risks and allow the development of new forms of thinking and support younger members of the team to develop these new areas of conservation, meant that Tate supported the establishment of staff positions in time-based media conservation a decade earlier than other institutions. Of course, this also wasn't entirely altruistic. There was also this sense that Tate would perhaps end up with works that had been lost elsewhere. So there are two assumptions that we often struggle with, which have actually already been alluded to a little bit in the conservation of contemporary art. First, surely, if it was made so recently, then why would it need conservation already? And secondly, if anything happens, can't we just simply send it back to the artists? They're still alive. So both of these assumptions, I think, speak a little bit to our panel, but in different ways. So the image on the left is made by the artist Roger Hiones. His extraordinary works are built up of copper sulfate crystals, incredibly fragile. They require quite particular skills of repair, a skill that the sociologist Fernando Dominguez Rubio has called mimeographic labor. So the painstaking work of matching or of keeping the same. So the work on the right is a work by Jan Dibitz from 1973, which was the subject of extensive research by the photography conservator Monica Marchesi. This work was returned to the artist to be remade, and the result was a work which was returned to the museum, having been altered by the artist in a number of important respects. So matching an original is not something an artist might necessarily be interested in. In some cases, such as with the care of video art, our actions as conservators are incredibly successful if we act in time. It's actually a very satisfying area of conservation to be in, time-based media, because you actually can do an immense amount of good if you get there in time. So it also makes actually this area of the work most urgent. Conservation is therefore sometimes needed early in the life of a work in order to respond to different vulnerabilities and fragilities, so that we can steward contemporary artwork successfully into the future. In many cases, these risks and fragilities are different from traditional materials. For example, the loss of information about how a complex installation is installed may be as big a risk as the material deterioration of its parts. So one of the things we do in the first term of the 2-year MSc in the Conservation of Contemporary Art and Media is invite the students to start to experiment, feel comfortable in the conservation laboratory, and experience some material magic. One such project was how to preserve a banana skin. So our starting point was Zoe Leonard's Strange Fruit, after David, made between 1992 and 97, a work that was made in response to the AIDS crisis and foregrounds repair as an act of solace in the face of grief. The artist ate the fruit, oranges, bananas, avocados, grapefruits, and repaired the skins using thread, buttons, zips. The number of fruit grew until it became an installation and was bought by the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And then the question of conservation arose. And I'm very grateful to fellow conservator Nina Quabeck, who explored this case in depth in her PhD research. So working with the conservator Christian Schneiderman, Leonard explored the question of whether the work should be preserved or allowed to decay. So here, for the students, they explore questions beyond the material, questions of artist's intent or artist's sanction, to use the term coined by Sherry Irvine, and to learn to understand that this is something that evolves over time and goes to the heart of the meaning of the work. They explored literature of conservation of waterlogged wood, of bog bodies, from banana importers to understand how banana skins age, and questions of meaning making. And they learned that conservation is a knowledge-producing exercise where there is no one answer to what are often quite wicked problems. They also learned that conservation is collaborative and a relational process. So Leonard ultimately decided that all but a handful of her strange fruit should be allowed to decay, but not have explored the questions raised by the conservation of this work without the partnership with the conservator and their skills. And I'm going to pass round the results of one of these experiments. It's 2 years old now, doing rather well, but please handle with care. So a bit of material magic. So this changing nature of art often calls for a response which is beyond the tangible and that considers the importance of the role of the conservator to steward a work through time, not only with science, but also with care. So Joan Tronto and Bernice Fisher defined care as a species activity that includes everything we do to maintain, continue, and repair our world so that we can live in it as well as possible. Tronto also identified 4 elements of care: attention, capability, responsibility, and responsiveness. And these, for me, provide a robust framework for the conservation of contemporary art. So by attention, that means returning to this fundamental question: what is it we're trying to preserve? What in our conservation efforts should we pay attention to? And that's really a situation where we come afresh to each work, not assuming we know those answers. So capability means asking whether we have the skills to conserve these works. Do we know enough? Are we the best placed to do this work? It often means working collaboratively with a broad range of people with specific skills. Responsibility asks us to consider the weight of our position as stewards. And finally, responsiveness asks us to consider whether our efforts are hitting the spot. Are these helping to ensure these artworks can continue to be seen, to be understood, and to be loved? So finally, let's briefly return to assumption 2 about returning objects to the artist. Conserving contemporary art requires a very different set of skills than those needed to create an artwork. I worked with the artist Susan Hiller for 25 years on various works in Tate's collection before her death in 2019. We had spent many years discussing her works. One in particular, Belshazzar's Feast, The Writing on the Wall, had evolved over time in quite dramatic ways, so that a number of different possible versions existed at once, taking on different forms. So here are the images from the first time it was installed at Tate in 1984, where a monitor was inserted into a false wall and Hiller's photographs and wallpaper were installed around the monitor. Here's an early campfire version at the ICA in 1986. The work was also broadcast on Channel 4, and here it's reimagined as beamed into a living room. And here is the installation in what might be considered its final form of the Tate version, changing little between this time and the death of the artist, although always retaining some little bits of variability when it went on loan. And here is the bonfire version, which Susan installed in 2015 at the Listen Gallery in London, which was the last time she was involved in an installation of the artist's proof of Belshazzar's Feast before she died. In all these years, I was working on trying to ensure that we understood what was important to preserve about this work. Each time we showed it, she challenged me to do better in understanding and documenting this work and its variability. A task I was doing for those conservators who would come after me, who had not had the privilege of working closely with the artist over many years. So I would argue close collaboration with the artist and their representatives is never an either-or situation, but rather a question of building relationships of trust over time in the spirit of collaboration. So in 2016, I invited Susan to be one of the artists to open the conference Media in Transition, a collaboration between Tate and the Getty Conservation Institute. As part of preparation for this panel in Media in Transition, I asked her what she felt her stake was in the future of this work. And she answered, "Why should I care, Pip? I'll be dead." So this brought home to me just how different our perspectives were. It is obvious in retrospect that Susan Hiller's perspective was as an artist, and for her, that object would always be an unfolding element of her artistic practice. But for me, my responsibility as a conservator was to think about the past, its present, and its future, to try and learn the work and what was important to preserve about it from the artist, to be mindful of its place in history of her work, but also art history more generally, so that I could plan for its future beyond Susan and help steward that future with care. Conservation as a professional practice is very different from an art practice. It requires a different understanding of materials. It requires asking a different set of questions, and also it is governed by a different ethical framework. Contemporary art conservators manage how an artwork might unfold over time, taking into consideration a number of factors and stakeholders. Their role is fundamentally social, working with the artist and often an extensive network of care that supports particular forms of practice. So the conservation of contemporary art requires infrastructure, which is why I'm now heading up a two-year M+HK program in the conservation of contemporary art and media at UCL, which aims to fill a very international skills gap. Our focus is on sculpture, installation art, and time-based media. We've developed a curriculum that provides the foundations for the types of complex decision-making contemporary art conservators make on a daily basis. It teaches our students not simply to have excellent practical skills, but also the ability to solve complex problems, considering the wider global context in which they work. So we take 12 students a year from around the world, and it takes a village, and we very much rely on our partners, such as Liam Museum and M+, to provide placements for our students so they can develop their skills and experience as professional conservators working in a world-class museum. I'm excited for our students from Hong Kong and China who will return to be part of this evolving infrastructure, supporting the vibrant and rapidly developing contemporary art scene here in Hong Kong. I hope that you, as an audience, will find ways to develop opportunities for these young conservators who will take the profession forward, both here and around the world. And thank you for listening.
Thank you for three very great presentations. I actually want to elaborate on collaboration and the importance of collaboration. So here at M+, we recently are collaborating with the Robotics and Machine Intelligence Laboratory at from the Department of Mechanical Engineering at Polytechnic University to upgrade robotic wheelchairs, namely Old People's Home, which is upstairs. So the artwork actually features motorized robotic wheelchairs, each with realistic elderly figures. Now, during the process of working with the robotics team, many questions sort of came up that it prompted a lot of questions that we hadn't previously considered. So Nancy, you discussed working with technical specialists to maintain the Holzer work. Kate, you shared insights about collaborating with a scent expert. And Pip, your training emphasizes navigating complex interdisciplinary relationships. Can maybe each of you describe a situation when collaborating with external specialists or artists led you to rethink or adjust your conservation decisions? And what did you learn from that experience?
So as I talked about in my presentation, we worked with artist Kim Baum with the restoration of the artwork, and we had a solo show in our museum last year, and he was, because of his very perfect and meticulous personality, he had to work by himself. For example, during our installation, he wanted to be alone at night in the gallery so that he could, think and arrange which one to put where for almost 2 weeks. So he's very into very meticulous, and so with collaborating him was very difficult in the beginning. But as we talked and got to know him and interviewed him, he gradually, opened his mind. And at the end, he was really open to us, and he made this great manual for restoration. So that was a good experience for us to, contact with the artist and the importance of connecting with them and giving, trust. So that was the beginning of our good relationship with him, and we also tried to make the relationship also to Korean artist Ibul, and so we know that her artwork is so complex, so we have made interviews in the last few years and started to get good relationship with the artist. And I think we are building it at the moment. So yeah, that was my experience.
Keep going. I think that's such an interesting question, because I think maybe one of the shifts that I've seen is the acknowledgement, given the kind of explosion of forms of practice of contemporary art, how much the museum relies on expertise outside the museum wall. And I think nurturing and thinking about actually what the responsibility might be of the museum to keep certain practices that we rely on so much. I mean, I'm thinking of ZKM and the incorporation of color vac into the museum, so really preserving that knowledge and expertise around taking care of CRTs is such an interesting role for the museum. But I also want to kind of think about performance works, and we recently, well, the last project I worked on at Tate, one of the case studies was Tony Conrad's 10 Years Alive on the Infinite Plane. And there we were looking at that transmission from an older group of performers to a kind of younger generation. And it really made us aware, I think, of how much we rely on certain practices of experimental music still being part of something that you can tap into, still being continued, that we will rely on every time we re-perform that work. So how do we keep some of these practices alive? How does the museum think about its role in supporting those practices, whether they're technical, whether they're kind of performative, so that we can continue to show these works that really depend on those practices staying alive?
Thanks for the question. I'm going to reflect actually on working with internal people and how that's influenced my practice. So I think I was joking with my former colleague Deborah Potter at the Tate how, you know, in conservation and collection care, we're control freaks. And so I think, you know, in our conservation profession, like we sort of like, we want to do everything the best we possibly can in the context we are. That's kind of the refrain that is in our field. And I think what we learn with contemporary art is that we do have to let go a little bit, and we are not the experts. Yes, we are we are conservators, and we come at it from a very particular viewpoint, but we might not carry all the expertise. So we need to be humble to that. And I would say that working with colleagues in IT, in an institution where we have a very large digital collection, we have up to a petabyte of material. It's a huge amount of work. And, you know, we sort of go out, do our research and go, okay, I understand digital storage. You've got to have 3 copies in 3 geographic locations, you know, and you're kind of like beating to this drum. And then you talk to the IT department at your museum who are experts in, you know, maintaining very confidential data, making sure that it's backed up. They are actually the experts. And I think what we learned was actually we need to defer to those experts, and they understand how to back up data in a way that I do not. And that really taught me a lot about listening to other people. And you come together as a group and make the best decision in the context where you are.
So just building on relationships, I want to talk about it a little bit more. How do you retain them? Like Pip, you had a relationship with Susan Heller for 25 years, and Kate, you've worked closely with Burrell Coro or David Lamelas. So how do you do that? I mean, just like technicians, for me, when I work within an institution, you somehow develop these relationships and you kind of need their help. You want them to do stuff. I mean, you could do something as simply as buying someone cookies, right? You know, they do you a favor, you buy them cookies. But how do you retain something for 10, 15, or even 25 years?
This is going. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I actually think it's a much younger artist actually that comes to mind when I think about those relationships with artists. It was an artist called Imarabashi Okon, who I worked with colleagues, Jack McConchy from Time-Based Media Conservation and Libby Island from Sculpture Conservation at Tate, on a collection of works which were coming into the collection. And what was so interesting there is that she was as curious about the museum processes as we were about understanding her artworks and what was important to preserve about them. So I think it's that capacity to listen, and like really listen and respond, and to kind of build that understanding over time. I mean, I think with Susan, you know, I think if I think back to my younger self, which was much more certain about things than I think I am now, you know, I think that it really does help to build that relationship of trust over time. And I guess, you know, we get older with the work, right? And you revisit it each time, and you bring your current self to that challenge, and that's the best that we can do. But if you can do that in partnership and with collaboration with the artist, that's an incredible privilege. And I think in an environment where there's so much pressure of time, actually we really need to think about what we're doing in museums and where we value those relationships compared to the kind of output of exhibitions. Because without artists, you know, the Contemporary Art Museum's nothing, right? So I think, Kate, you know, your mission statement's so beautiful in that idea of providing a home. That's a statement about a kind of hospitality to artists, which is to give them time.
I don't think I need to say anything else.
Oh, really?
So thank you, Nancy, Kate, and Pip, for sharing your thoughts today. It was really an honor for me to actually share the floor with you, truly. So I want to thank everyone who joined. We're going to take a short break and then continue with our next session.